Hi, this is your coach, Joe Lucas, and welcome to this episode of the Magellan Network Show. Hey, in this episode, let's talk about how to go ahead and rate client relationships. What makes a functional, profitable client relationship, and then what makes a dysfunctional, unprofitable client relationship. So let's go ahead and dig right in on this. The reason why I brought this topic up in this episode is recently I was talking to one of my longer term clients I've had for many years, and it's a little State of the Union call and things like that. And somehow we got into the markets, and when we're recording this, market's been really, really good. Talk about a V, right? It's like a real strong V. And we're just talking about that, and I said, man, how'd you do with your clients, as far as keeping them in the game? And we all know back in March, toward the latter part of March, early April, things got a little spicy, dicey in our game. And, part of the protocol that pretty much all my clients run was make sure everybody's where they need to be from an investment standpoint. Unfortunately for this advisor, he, kept all his clients in the game except for two. And we were talking about those two clients, and I said, well, tell me the story, and I'm not going to bore everybody with all the details, but these are smaller clients, $250,000 plus or minus, so definitely not A-level or double or triple A type clients, but nice people, right? So let's talk first about how to evaluate your relationships, and then I'll get back to my story. So I believe, and I like things simple, because I think advisors have, because we're all smart, right? There's a tendency to make things overly complex. So let's just kind of keep things to what I call the basics, almost like a core four. And when I look at client relationships, and by the way, you can apply this to pretty much any type of business, but let's apply it here. So to me, the first thing, we are in a personal relationship, personal services business, right? I mean, it's not, we're going to be intimate from a knowledge basis with our clients. So the first thing is likability. I gotta like them, right? And because if you don't like the people that you serve, if you don't like the partners in your business relationship, then you're always going to feel stress. And here's the way you test that theory. Client's going to come in today for a review, and you hope they cancel, right? Client's on the phone. Client wants to talk to you. Hey, take a message. I'll call them back, right? If they invited you out for lunch or a drink or something or a cup of coffee, you would I'd find a way not to go, right? So those are to me kind of the markers of not a happy relationship. So likability is important. Now why? Likability begets rapport. Rapport begets trust. Trust allows us to have honest and open communications, which allow us to then make recommendations that are then followed upon, right? So likability, rapport, trust, I gotta have that. That's number one, okay? Number two, and by the way, when I say number two, these are flat and they're all equally important, not one's more important than the other. Number two, profitability, right? Minimums. And when I say that, I don't mean from a standpoint of, assets, right? I don't care. In our world today, assets are meaningless unless they're productive assets, right? They're driving revenue, right? And I mean more in an advisory way, not in a transactional way. So I'm going to let you, I'm not going to sit there and say, here's everybody's numbers, but here's what I have found to be sort of some ballpark guidelines. And I'm going to put it in two buckets. Bucket number one, you're independent, you own, operate either through an IBD, an RA, or some hybrid model. Bucket number two, you're associated with a major wirehouse, okay? Two different buckets. So I would say in the wirehouse bucket, minimums. These are minimums. If you're not driving $5,000 a top line off everyone in relationships as a minimum, not an average, a minimum, then you got to look at things. Because let's do the math. 5K, what, 50, 60% comes off the top from the mothership, right? So what am I left with? $2,000 out of 5, maybe I'm left with $2,000 gross top line, right? Then I have some of my expenses that my firm does not pay for, right? That comes off the top, right? Then I got taxes, that comes off the top. So that $5,000 client, what are you netting? $1,200, $1,500? Think about that. I know you don't want to, but that's reality. So I believe on the wirehouse, and again, we're talking bare bone minimums, and then you can figure out what that means, what fees you need to charge. But man, if you got less than that, I'm sorry, man, you're not making money. You're not profitable, and you're allowed to make a profit. You deserve to make a profit. On the outside game, right? The RA, there's a little bit different. There's so many different business models, right? I've got clients that work out of their house with 85% margin before tax. Then I've got clients that have opulent offices and staff up to yin yang, and they're probably nets closer to a wirehouse kind of payout, but they control their game, right? So I'm gonna let you. But so to me, anywhere from 2,500 as a minimum, right, all the way up to whatever you want to do there. But you got to know what profitability means, right? So I got likable and I got profitable. Now, the third piece, coachable. Now let's get back to my client. So what was the challenge in his relation? Well, there's really two challenges, right? Number one, their small clients are not really profitable, but they've been around a long time. So, we as this industry look at loyalty, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in this case here, what happened was that, we like the client. They're not really profitable for us, but here's the real kicker. They're not coachable. They don't take advice. When the most important advice my client could give them is stay the course back in March, they bailed and did not get back in, by the way. So where do you think they sit today? It's a train wreck. An absolute train wreck, right? And then I asked him, I said, well, how much time, and just out of curiosity, he goes, Joe, I had multiple conversations with them. We did a Zoom meeting. I almost pleaded with them. It was such a wrong thing. I said, so you put a ton of emotional energy. He goes, yeah, you have no idea. And when they wanted to pull, I felt sick to my stomach putting the trade request in to liquidate. Made me sick to my stomach. It's okay, right? And even with that conversation, he said, well, I'm going to try to, and I said, what'd you do after that? He goes, I wanted to get them back in a little, even if I had to dollar cost them in a little bit over time, just to kind of get them in, and they didn't want to do it. Sat in cash, right? Which is like burning money. So I said, what are you going to do here? I said, so they're not, you like them, which is great. They're loyal, that's fine. Economically, business case, there's the total business case, they got to go. Not even a question, right? The reason why they're still with you is you like them and loyalty. I said, but here's the real big problem. They don't take advice. And when a client stops taking advice, they can't be a client anymore. It's like you're just kicking a can down the road that's going to come back and bite you, either legally, economically, or both. Now, remember I said there's core four, right? So we got likable, I got profitable and coachable. Three things. Now, if you want to sit there and scale, well, how do you rate these? 1 to 5, 1 to 10, whatever you want to do. Pass, fail, right? I mean, that's kind of your call. I'm going to let you decide that there's no right way to do this, but I will say this, you need to do this. You need to sit down and score your relationships and be honest, right? And now, why won't advisors do that? And we will get to the fourth one. I'm not going to leave you hanging forever on this. Why does an advisor do this? Because of fear, scarcity, and they just they're not confident in their relationships, right? There's there's this uneasiness a lot of advisors have because, again, you're in an at-will relationship. None of your clients sign on for, here's a 5-year contract to run my money or to be my advisor. So there's a ton of advisor insecurity that runs around. And with that insecurity, what happens is that you will fold. You will reduce your standards. You'll ignore them in some cases, right? And that always comes back to bite you, right? So how do you get rid of insecurity? Then I promise you we'll get to the fourth one. I mean, if you think about insecurity, it's about scarcity primarily. So if you don't have a pipeline of prospects, if you're not driving your referral and introduction game, if you're not maximizing profitability and the value you can provide your relationships by adding a lot of value and by having all their money, financial planning, insurance, or if you're not maximizing that relationship and tying them all into you, you're always going to feel a little uneasy, right? Just the way it is. So you need to make sure that you've got a plan. I used the term, I was interviewing one of our strategic partners at Magellan Network, and I was talking about relational capital, which is a term I've coined, where an advisor does more than just the basics, right? Reviews, financial plans, things like that. We really go above and beyond, for our relationship and create that relational capital. It's very, very important to do that, right? So with that said, we're talking about just kind of getting out of that insecurity game and really being secure. And when you have your introduction referral game working, right? You have your optimization game working, you have these things working, mentally you're going to feel more abundant and you're going to be okay in having those conversations. In fact, a lot of you have too many households, not the right households. You all need to declare to yourselves, how many slots do I really have? How many seats do I have on my bus, my boat, whatever metaphor you want to use, but know the number, right? The word more is nebulous. That's not part of our game. But you need to know that. So let's get to the fourth one. So we got likable, right? And by the way, likable, gotta have, right? Profitable, gotta have. Coachable, otherwise you're literally gonna drive yourself crazy. And especially with Reg BI coming down, we can't afford as an industry, as a profession, to have dysfunctional relationships anymore. No longer the case. This is not about trying to get them to do a trade or trying to get them to do this. Like, they got to be all in with you. Either they're drinking the Kool-Aid or they're not. And for a lot of advisors, this is going to be a very interesting, window of time when this rate gets rolled out, where they're going to where it's going to force the changing of how the relationships are run. Right? Overall, I think it's a good thing. In most respects, there's no perfect anything, but I think it's going to cause advisors to really take a look at the relationships and make sure they're functional. At the end of the day, what we need is the right relationships, not a lot of relationships. When I started my coaching career 26 years ago, as all of us did, right? We just we did what we needed to do to survive. But if you keep that mentality throughout your career, that's what you create. That survival mentality. You've got to be okay firing clients. Right? You got to be okay of having a standard. And if that standard's not met, then there's got to be a parting. Bottom line, right? Going back to my client. So what did I task him with? The conversation. Either we're gonna do what we need to do, or they're gonna be gone. Period. Bottom line, they're not profitable. They're not profitable either, unfortunately. So they're nice people, but unfortunately, we can't run a nonprofit. Number 4, I call it leverage or referability. So will this client act as an advocate? Will they refer? Will they introduce us? Are they leverageable? So we have likable, profitable, coachable, leverageable. Core 4 of relationship, right? Now, you can't force somebody to refer, right? As much as we like to think we can. And it's weird, right? Because you can really, and I have it here in my game too, I just accept it. I don't like it, but I accept it. Sometimes you just go ahead and you have conversations with people and you just can't get things done the way you need to, and they just don't refer. So it is what it is. And there's nothing you can really do about that going forward. You still need to serve the client, but understand they're not going to act as an advocate for you. It just doesn't happen. So what I really like you all to do, as we wrap up this episode, is really look at your clients. I mean, I do that inside of my game. When I declared Magellan Network was going to be no more than 300 advisors, instantly that made me think about what the new standard needs to be. And we started to move into that new standard, and we cut some people this week, which you're like a coach cuts clients. Yeah, we do. Because we have standards. I want you to have those same standards too. Okay, so thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and let me tell my story inside of this episode of the Magellan Network Show. If you want to come check us out, MagellanNetwork.net. You can put in an application. Do you want to be one of the 300? Until next time, have a great week. So there you have it. If you really enjoyed watching this episode, go ahead and subscribe to the Magellan Network Show with Coach Joe here on YouTube. And remember, I'm always here to help you become a better entrepreneur, business owner, and financial advisor. With that, I'll see you next time on the Magellan Network Show with me, Coach Joe. Take care and goodbye.